Some roads aren't just roads, they're traps. A stretch of pavement, cracked and worn, cutting through the endless dark of Black Hollow Forest. No streetlights, no signs of life, just a void of silence, and something waiting. Everyone in town knows the stories. A red truck that appears and disappears without a driver. A rusting, hulking beast that's always waiting beneath a flickering street lamp. It doesn't belong to anyone, and yet, it's always there. No tire tracks, no engine noise, just the feeling that, somehow, it's watching. But Danny Caldwell doesn't believe in stories. He's a trucker. He's seen real danger, icy roads, back alley threats, the kind of things that actually kill. Ghost trucks? Urban legends? That's just nonsense. At least that's what he thought. Until tonight. Because on Black Hollow Road, the truck isn't just waiting, it's looking for a driver.
People knew a lot about the old road that went through Black Hollow Forest. Even though the asphalt was cracked, there were no streetlights, and deer would sometimes run across it at night. The reasons given were just make-believe ones that people told themselves to avoid facing the real reason why no one wanted to go that way. The people who lived there, especially the older ones, knew more. They had heard the stories told in bars and passed down from generation to generation. Some people had even seen it. The red truck. It came back every time, even when it wasn't there. An old, huge car that was starting to rust. The paint had faded to an oddly deep red color. It never had a driver. It had never been seen come. It had never been seen leave. Still, it always moved in some way. It would go missing for days and then show up further down the road, waiting in the dim light of a single street lamp. Danny Caldwell wasn't interested in ghost stories. He was a long-haul trucker who lived on the road and had seen enough to know that people who were careless or new to what they were doing were afraid. The real threat wasn't magical. It was in the middle of nowhere and running out of gas. It was going over rough ice in a twisting mountain pass. It was at the wrong truck stop at the wrong time. But that night, all the years he had spent on the road couldn't have warned him about what he would see. His shift took longer than he thought it would, and the extra time was wearing him out mentally. His GPS told him to take Black Hollow Road, which was a quick and easy route. He didn't think about it for long before turning onto it. He did not have time for charm. It was getting dark, and the thick forests on either side made a tunnel of darkness around him. His headlights made a narrow road in front of him, and the drive was smooth for the first few miles. He then saw the lights. At the bend in the road in front of me, a truck was sitting still. The dim yellow light from a street lamp barely lit up its red body. When he saw it, he felt a strange anxiety rising in his stomach. Something about being there made not right. Too much thought went into the placement. It felt like a game piece waiting for its next move. The road didn't have any skid mark. There were no signs that it moved or stopped all of a sudden. It was there all the time. A rusty metal sign stood next to the road. The words, "No dumping, keep your city clean," were hard to read because of the dirt and scratches that covered them. The words had also been messed up, with deep gouges in the metal that looked like someone had tried to erase them. Danny tensed up his jaw. The truck was making it hard to drive. He couldn't get out of it. He turned off the engine, grabbed his flashlight, and got out of the car with a sigh. The air felt denser as soon as his boots hit the ground. It smelled like wet dirt mixed with metal, maybe rust or something worse. He didn't pay attention to it and instead walked over to the truck and hit the driver's side door hard. Not an answer. His second hit was stronger. From inside, a hollow sound came back. After a short pause, something pushed back. Danny took a deep breath. His gut told him to move away, get back in his cab, and leave, but he kept his feet on the ground. Slowly, his eyes moved down to the pool of still water next to the huge tires of the truck. That's when he saw it. The picture in the water was not right. There was, of course, the truck, but there was also a person inside. A man was behind the wheel, and his face was hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. His mouth was wide open, and he was screaming in silence. Danny felt his heart beating hard against his rib. Instead of moving, his image stood still, but the person in the truck was looking at him. Then it smiled. The door to the truck groaned as it opened. There was a rush of stinky air that smelled like rot and something old that had been waiting for too long. There was static on the CB radio inside, and then there was a voice that was low, gruff, and far away, like it was speaking from the bottom of a deep, dark well. The goods need to keep moving. Danny wasn't moving, not able to move. It wasn't fear that stopped him from running, but something about the voice. It was an order. There is a rule built into the road itself. He moved his fingers. His body told him to turn around and get away from that truck before. Inside the cab, a shadow moved. He was now taking short gasps of breath. The truck was never left behind. It had never been left behind. The only thing it did was wait. It had now found its next driver. A long way off, past the bend in the road, another streetlight clicked on. In the darkness, the faint outline of a second car appeared and stood still. Danny wasn't by himself on this road. The red truck wasn't either. Danny couldn't get a steady breath as his mind fought against the red truck's strange pull. Everything in his body was telling him to move, to run back to his rig, and get out of there, but he couldn't. Fear wasn't the only thing. Something deeper, cold, and strange was wrapping around his ribs like chains he couldn't see. While the truck was moving, the CB radio hissed again. The static noise rose and fell like a slow, rough breath. There are moments when instinct screams at you to run, but something stronger holds you in place. What would you do if you were in Danny's shoes? Would you get in the truck, or would you fight back? Drop your answer in the comment. I need to know if you'd make it out of Black Hollow Road. And if you're liking the story so far, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps keep the stories rolling. The cargo must keep moving. Now the words were clear, but they were deep and twisted, and they had a weight that didn't belong in this world. The door was open and the rusty hinges were moving slightly in the still air while they waited. Danny's hands tensed and relaxed at his side. His heart beat so fast it hurt his ears. He had to force himself to look down at the puddle and the strange reflection in it again. The man inside the truck was still there, looking with a grin that was too big to be real. Now, though, there was something else in the mirror, something behind Danny. A shape. In the dark, there was a figure. He felt a strong rush of energy. He turned around, but the road was empty. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness. There was only the harsh silence of Black Hollow Forest. Not at all. Not silent. A sound that was weak but clear. Steps. Not the heavy thud of boots on concrete, but a slower, dragging sound, like stepping on gravel with bare feet. Danny fell backwards, and his boot hit the puddle. He looked around in the dark with his flashlight shaking in his hand. His breath was too fast and too shallow. Nothing. He could feel it, though. There was something there. Looking at. Waiting. The CB crackled louder, and the static changed shape and became something that sounded like voices. Dozens of voices whispering in a language he didn't understand. Dan took one more step back and then stopped moving. The front lights of the truck came on. White lights that were too bright and too sudden cut through the night. Danny stumbled because of how strong it was, and his vision blurred for a moment. A deep mechanical groan filled his ears, like an engine starting up, but the truck hadn't moved. It was still parked, still not ready. Danny's set up. The sound came from his own truck. He turned around and saw that his headlights were shining clearly and that his engine was making a deep rumble on the road. He hadn't turned it on, though. His breath shook. There was something in his truck. There was something sitting behind the wheel. It was hard to see through the window, but there it was, a shape in the driver's seat that wasn't moving, looking at him. Danny clenched his stomach. His brain told him to run, do something, anything. But as soon as he put one foot in front of the other, the CB in the red truck started to crackle again. The cargo must keep moving. The voice then changed. It looked like him, named Danny Caldwell. His name came through the silence like a rusty blade scraping against metal. His knees were almost giving out. Not at all. It wasn't real, though. This was either a dream caused by being too tired, a sick joke, or a hard hit. Danny could not breathe. It came from inside his truck. Take your time. Thoughtful. 3 hits. Finally, his legs gave up and pushed him backwards while he searched for his keys. His mind was screaming at him to leave right away. As he ran to his rig, his boots hitting the ground, he wasn't thinking and wasn't even fully aware of what he was doing. He grabbed the doorknob. Locked. He had a very fast heartbeat. While he was driving, he never locked his doors. Never. One more knock. It came from the passenger side this time. Dan turned around quickly, his breath rough. Inside the cab, the shape changed. He looked at himself in the glass and saw that something wasn't quite right. The eyes were not right. It's too dark, not enough substance. Afterwards, it had a smile. Danny stumbled backwards, and his heart hit his ribs hard. He wasn't aware of the puddle at his feet, or the fact that his boots had slid back into the still water. The reflection moved, not his, something else. The door to his truck started to squeak open. Danny turned around and ran. The road had been there before the town, before the first people came to Black Hollow and cut through the thick, never-ending trees. When there were no maps, names, or warning. There had always been a road here, like a scar going through the thick forest. Something had always been on it. Something old. Something that didn't fit in the world of men. It had changed many times before it became the red truck. Before it, there was a big, black wagon pulled by horses with eyes that were always closed. Before that, there was a wooden cart with rotten wheels that was always moving and carrying something that couldn't be seen. It didn't have a real shape or a single face. It was just the road, the trip, and the never-ending need for a driver. Because there was always someone on the road. There had to be someone at the wheel. Eyes to see what to do next. A soul that is tied to its path. It found them. It was ready for them. It was ready for Danny Caldwell. Danny sped off, but the road seemed to go on for a longer time than it should have. His boots hit the cracked concrete, and the sound of cicadas far away was drowned out by something deeper. A pulsing, mechanical breath, an engine that shouldn't be running, and a force that had no source yet filled the air. He was afraid to look back. His truck started up by itself. There was something in the driver's seat. Someone or something had knocked on the cab's door, said his name over the static, and smiled at him in the mirror. It wasn't just a ghost story. Not just a truck left behind on the side of a forgotten road. It seemed to want him. Dan Caldwell had never been one to take it easy, though. He clenched his teeth and forced himself to stop running. Even though his heart was pounding in his head, his legs wouldn't move, even though he was feeling intense fear. He turned around. The red truck just sat there. The car's headlights were turned off again, but the door was still open, as if to invite or demand. Behind it, Danny's truck was just sitting there, its smoke rising slowly into the night. It was still there, the shape in the driver's seat, looking at, waiting. Danny's eyes got narrow. His hands were clenched together. He had been on the road all his life and been through worse. There had been ice storms, drunk people who wanted to kill him, and men with guns who had no morals on that road before. Those threats were real, though. This was a whole different thing. Also, it would have to fight him if it wanted him. When Danny stood up straight, he walked straight toward his own truck. As soon as he stepped onto the road, the red truck CB started to crackle again. The goods need to keep moving. Danny didn't care. The shape of the person in the truck driver's seat changed. He didn't stop even though the air got thick and squished his lung. His boots slid through another puddle. The reflection was still off. It still showed a happy thing that wasn't there. He had his hand on the truck's handle, locked. Something inside turned its head. Danny clenched his teeth. He wasn't messing around with this thing. He took his extra key out of his pocket without taking his eyes off the thing in the driver's seat. Even though the CB radio whispered his name again, his hands stayed still. The sound was warped and stretched like metal being stretched and bent. The key went into the lock easily. Press. The door opened by itself. Danny took a step back. As he raised his flashlight, the beam shook and lit up the driver's seat. Not full. The engine was still going, though. It still whispered on the CB. It looked like something had been sitting on the seatbelt for a while. Danny took a deep breath. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. From behind him, he heard a slow creak. The red truck. The door for the guest was open. Danny's heart rate went up. He turned around and just barely caught a glimpse of something moving inside the taxi. The shape in the water. There was a man in a hat in the mirror, frozen in that awful grin. It finally started to move now. Danny shook his hands together. Not at all. Not tonight. He had lived through many things that should have killed him. He wasn't going to let a bad dream on a back road kill him. He moved with a sharp breath in, head straight for the red truck. If this thing had been waiting for someone else to drive and wanted him to take the wheel, then it might be time for someone to take charge. The air changed as soon as his hand touched the door. There was no more static. There was silence in the forest. The red truck's headlights came on for the first time. Very bright. Way too much. Putting a bright white light over the whole road that ate everything up. Danny didn't shut his eye. He went inside. The door slammed shut behind him. The whole cab shook as the door slammed shut behind him, like the truck had taken a deep breath that made the metal rattle. Danny's knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel. The dashboard came to life with dials spinning around in a crazy way and lights blinking in strange, weird ways. One last burst of static came from the CB radio before it went totally silent. The truck then moved, not like how a normal car shifts into gear. It jerked forward as if something had grabbed it from the ground and pushed it down the road. Danny tried hard to stay cool, even though the sudden acceleration made his stomach hurt. It was going to have a tough time if it thought it could drive itself. Dan pulled the wheel hard to the side to try to get the truck off the road. Nothing. The wheel didn't want to move. It felt like he was holding on to something that wasn't meant to be controlled by hand. The window in front of me showed only darkness. There was nothing dark, no trees, and not even the black hollow road's broken pavement. It was just a huge, empty space that went on forever. Danny clenched his teeth. He growled, "No," and his voice got hoarse. "You're not taking me." He pulled the wheel again with all his strength. This time, something gave. The truck swerved sharply, and the tires screeched against a road that didn't seem to be there anymore. The radio screamed in anger, and the dashboard lights went out. Danny didn't mind. He leaned into the turn, trying to get the upper hand. He would drive this thing straight into the ground if it wanted a driver. Something deep and angry was shaking under the hood as the engine roared. He could feel the wheel trying to get away from him as it began to turn on its own. Danny fought back, and as he did, veins popped out in his arm. Afterwards, the truck made a lot of noise. Not the car, not the tires, the truck itself. A primal howling scream came from everywhere around him, shaking the windows, the cab, and even the air in his lung. It wasn't just mad, it hurt too. Daniel showed his teeth in a way that was half snarl, half grin. He spat, "You don't like that, huh? Thought I'd just roll over and let you take me? You picked the wrong man, you ugly son of a..." The glass was broken. The glass had a long, jagged crack in it that didn't look like usual damage. It looked like lines, dark lines that pulsed, and they were getting bigger. Danny gasped when he realized that something was growing under the glass. It was pushing outward and stretching like live tissue. He felt the wheel in his hands get warm all of a sudden. "It's too warm." He looked down. Body parts. The steering wheel that was wrapped in leather was changing into flesh. It was pale, wet, and beating like a heart. Danny pulled back and let go of it right away. As soon as he did that, the truck jerked back into control, the wheel turning on its own, and the engine going wild with joy. Danny shook his hands together. "Not at all. Not yet." He yelled and reached down to pull the gear shift into neutral. The machine made noise. The truck shook, and its speed was losing. Dan thought he had it for a very short time. Afterwards, the belt around his chest snapped into place. He gasped as an impossible force pushed against his rib. The belt got tighter and tighter until it didn't feel like a belt at all and more like a hand pressing down on him and keeping him still. Danny clenched his teeth and tried to fight, but the pressure only got worse. He had trouble seeing around the edges. Now the air around him was thick, damp, and throbbing. After that, the CB radio came back to life from the dashboard. Something no longer messed up, no longer far away. It was next to his ear. The cargo must keep moving. Dan's scream could not be heard over the sound of metal breaking. The screen was cut in half. In front of him, the steel body of the truck began to peel apart. It groaned as it stretched and bent into shapes that were not possible. From the middle of the cab, just below the window, a huge, jagged mouth with too many teeth stuck out opened wide. Danny couldn't breathe. The truck was more than just living. It was hungry. One last tightening of the seatbelt yanked him forward with unimaginable force. Danny's hand scratched at the cover, the door, and everything else, but they couldn't get away. The mouth got bigger. Afterwards, it took him right up. As the truck's open mouth closed around Danny Caldwell, he let out a rough, raw scream that was hard to hear. The display shut off by itself. The cracks in the glass were fixed. The safety belt moved back into place. The engine of the truck made a hum. The red truck sat still under the shifting streetlight once more, waiting. There was always someone on the road. There had to be someone at the wheel, eyes to see what to do next. Finally, it had a new driver. The road is full of mysteries, and some vehicles should never be there. But what happens when you don't see the danger coming? In the next video, a traveler accepted a ride and vanished without a trace. If you think you can watch without shivering, click now and test your courage.